Good evening. My name is Phil Easter, historian and writer, also known as the Amazing Memory Man. Tonight I would like to share stories with all of you about my trip to the 1976 Montreal Olympic Games. Briefly, I will mention I also went to Munich, Germany in 1972, and at a future time I will share stories about that very historic Olympics in 1972 in Munich, Germany, a future YouTube message on that Olympics. This year marks exactly 50 years since Munich. I think I might wait a few more months till the month of September, because that'll be exactly 50 years to the month of my trip to Munich, Germany. But again tonight I will share with you from the 1976 Montreal Olympics, where I met several Olympic champions, including Bruce Jenner, who won the decathlon, and Frank Shorter, who won the Munich Marathon 4 years earlier, the gold medal in Munich, and this time took the silver medal in Montreal. Although his silver medal time in Montreal was actually faster than his gold medal time in Munich, which does sound a little funny, but a man from East Germany ran just 35 seconds faster than Frank in Montreal to win the Montreal Marathon. But Frank Shorter, the greatest Olympic marathon runner from the United States, the only American to ever win 2 medals in the Olympic marathon. Well, in 1976, I was living in Boston from part of 1975 and 1976. I'm from Baltimore, but I was living in Boston for about 1 year, and in April of that year, 1976, I ran the famous Boston Marathon for the 5th time, each year between 72 and 76. I was very proud of that, and especially in Boston in 1976, it was 100 degrees at the start of that marathon, 12 noon in Hopkinton, 26.2 miles from the finish in Boston. The hottest Boston Marathon ever. Very rare just to get that hot in Boston in April. But that was the hottest day a Boston Marathon ever occurred. I was proud to finish. It took me longer than any other marathon I ever ran, but I did finish. So I was looking forward to going to Montreal a few months later to see the best track athletes in the world, and also athletes in other sports. So I moved back to Baltimore on July 1st. That incredible weekend, the bicentennial of our country, the July 4th celebration was really amazing in 1976, the 200-year anniversary of the United States of America. And on July 12th, I then took a train from Baltimore to Montreal on the evening of July 12th, arriving at about 7 o'clock in the morning on July 13th, 4 days before the opening ceremony of the Montreal Olympics. Now, my first full day in Montreal was July 14th, and I went out to the Olympic Stadium. I wanted to see what it looked like, and just by luck, I happened to see these 2 big American athletes wearing the USA uniform, and I realized that one of them was Bruce Jenner, because I already followed track and field a lot, and this was just a few weeks before he would win the gold medal on July 29th. So I walked up and said hello and shook hands. He gave me his autograph, and with him was also pole vaulter Dave Roberts, who would finish 3rd in the pole vault. So I met a very famous athlete even 3 days before the games began, and really later that same evening there was a practice track near the main stadium. Of course, the main stadium had the official track where the great runners would compete once the games began, but nearby there was a practice track. And someone told me that evening some of the famous runners who would be in the Olympics would be, just taking workouts, but people could come and watch. And so I also met Frank Shorter at that time, the first time, of 3 times I ever met him. I met him a second time in Montreal a few weeks later, before he ran the marathon. And 4 years later, in 1980, here in Baltimore, that year I was teaching a course at Johns Hopkins University, a special course called History of the Modern Olympic Games, where I covered stories of every Olympics since 1896. and Frank Shorter came out of the gym one afternoon. I was very lucky to meet him right there, and he autographed the book for me. I had his book with me because he was going to speak at Towson University a few hours later. I was planning to go to that, but just by luck, I happened to be on the Hopkins campus earlier, and he visited the athletic director at Hopkins at that time. And so it was easier to meet him then, because a few hours later, the crowd at Towson was much larger, hundreds of people, and I heard him speak there, but I already got his autograph a few hours before that, which was very nice. But in Montreal, the opening ceremony was on July 17th. Now, I did not have a ticket for that. The opening ceremony is the hardest ticket to get, and I applied for tickets for Montreal a year earlier when I was living in Boston. I sent my application in to buy many tickets. I got almost everything I wanted except the opening ceremony and the gold medal basketball game. Those were already sold out 13 months ahead of time. But I got everything else I wanted, including women's gymnastics, one evening of what turned out to be a very historic night. A young lady from Romania, Nadia Comaneci, just 14 years old, scored the first perfect 10 in gymnastics history on the night of July 19th, 1976 at the Montreal Forum. I was so honored by luck to see this wonderful event. Gymnastics, a great sport, both men and women taking part for many years, but no one ever scored a perfect 10. And before those Olympics were over, she scored 6 more, winning 3 gold medals. But ironically, the day I saw her, when she did the perfect 10 that night, her team of Romania just took the silver medal. Now the reason for that was, it was a team competition that first night, and the 6 young ladies from Romania together still did not do quite as well as the 6 young ladies from the Soviet Union, averaging out all the scores. So that's why Nadia, even though she scored a perfect 10, just got a silver medal that night. But she went on to win 3 gold medals in the coming week by the time gymnastics was over at the Montreal Olympics. Well, the track and field is my favorite sport, and I was able to see 7 of the 8 days. And as I mentioned, I saw Bruce Jenner on the day he won the decathlon, also July 29th. And the final day is always exciting because you have relay races, the 4x100 and the 4x400, both men and women, and also the men's marathon, which begins at the Olympic Stadium, and then they went out for most of the 26 miles on a course, and then they come back to the Olympic Stadium. So I saw the beginning and end of the marathon, but in between, about 2.5 hours of many different track events, including the relays and the men's 1,500 meters, which was won by John Walker of New Zealand. He was favored, but still sometimes even favorites at the Olympics don't do as well as expected. He admitted later it was a lot of pressure, and when he crossed the finish line, he later told reporters his first feeling was one of relief more than joy, but he felt great joy and happiness soon after that, of course. But the first feeling was just one of relief, since he was expected to win. The top 6 runners were all within 1.5 seconds in that 1,500 meter race, about 1 mile. That's amazing. They finished so close together. And the second place runner, his name was Ivo van Dam, a young man from Belgium, just 22 years old. He took the silver medal in both the 800 meters and the 1,500 meters. But sadly, before the year was over, on Christmas Day, Ivo van Dam was killed in a car accident in France. He was from Belgium, but he was visiting people in France and sadly died in a car accident. As I said, the marathon, Frank Shorter came in second this time. It was won by Cherpinski from East Germany, who beat Frank by just 35 seconds, a time of 2 hours, 9 minutes, and 55 seconds. And Frank's time was 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 30 seconds. So it's about a 35-second difference. But again, Frank Shorter, the greatest American marathon runner ever, winning gold in Munich in 1972 and silver in Montreal. Well, the same day of those track and field finals, was also the gold medal soccer game between East Germany and Poland. So I was in that stadium for many hours that day. They had the soccer game about 8 o'clock at night, and East Germany won that game by a score of 3-1. Poland were defending champions from Munich 4 years earlier, but East Germany won this time. And it's interesting that just 2 years before, in 1974, West Germany won the World Cup of Soccer. So again, at that time, they were two separate Germanys politically, and therefore had different Olympic teams and different teams for World Cup competition. But now, of course, since 1990, Germany is one nation again. So they compete as one nation. Whereas the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, and now you have about 16 different countries, each with their own Olympic team. The Montreal Olympics ended on August 1st, 1976. I went to that closing ceremony that night, and it was a very touching experience. And you know, the Olympic flame is extinguished. They put up on the scoreboard always the next Olympic city for the Summer Games, and that year would be Moscow 4 years later, 1980. So the last national anthem played in Montreal was that of the Soviet Union. I find it interesting that now even Russia, which was always the largest part of the Soviet Union, it's the same national anthem for what is just called Russia, as well as when it was the Soviet Union. After the closing ceremony, they let people come down to the track for about an hour or so, and that was nice. So I was very happy for that. I got to actually go down to the track, and I jogged one time around that track where the greatest runners in the world had competed during the 2 weeks of the Olympics. And that was a nice experience at the end. And very informal, and so many people enjoyed that experience to come down to the track after the official ending of the closing ceremony. That the closing ceremony ticket was not as hard to get. Again, that opening is really hard because what happens is team delegations are given so many tickets for team members and family and people like that. So the opening ceremony is a very hard ticket to get, but I did watch it on TV with the family I stayed with in Montreal. My overall experience was very enjoyable going to Montreal in 1976. And also, since I was a runner, I did some running in the Montreal area. I joined the local running club one time for a fun run. And I came back to Baltimore in early August. And I have all these years of great memories of Montreal Olympic Games. So some of my future YouTube messages coming up in coming months, I would like to share with you stories of the 5 greatest American presidents. Stories of the 5 greatest presidents, which I'm not going to tell you who they are, but stay tuned. That might be my next message. I also, maybe in the month of May, we'll see. And also coming up, I'll have what I call my national suggestions. Several ways I think America could be improved in certain areas of life. They'll be called Phil Easter's National Suggestions. And also I would like to share with you stories of the wonderful island nations of Great Britain and Ireland. In 1979, I took a long trip of 15 weeks to those 2 wonderful countries, had many interesting experiences with people I met, and saw famous people like Queen Elizabeth on the Isle of Man, Pope John Paul II in Ireland, and attended the famous Wimbledon tennis tournament in 1979. So I will share stories of that wonderful trip, which I still remember very well 43 years later. And in September this year, again, I think I'll have a special message called Remembering the 1972 Munich Olympics and the Beginning of Modern Terrorism. I think it's important that young people learn about that tragic event that happened during the Olympic Games 50 years ago. So again, this is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. We recorded this on April 28th, 2022. As the great CBS television newsman Edward R. Murrow said back in the 1950s, good night and good luck.